Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the 31st Annual IUN Forum on Child Abuse and Neglect. My name is Marshila D. Harris, and I am the BSW Program Director and Assistant Professor with the School of Social Work at Indiana University Northwest. I am joined this morning with my colleague, Elizabeth Guzman Arredondo, Director of Human Services and Associate Professor of Human Services at Calumet College. We have 4 great workshops scheduled for this month and invite you to join us each Friday at 9 a.m. To get us started, I am going to turn things over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our 31st annual. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Today, our workshop that we are going to present for you is Stacy Gagnon. I will be introducing her a little bit later, but I wanted to take care of some housekeeping business here. There are going to be CEU certificates available after our workshop today. What we would ask you to do is fill out and complete our evaluation. And at the end of that evaluation will be the opportunity for you to download a certificate of attendance or your CEUs. It's important that you will register for each one of our workshops every week. Those workshops are, again, every Friday, April 16th, April 23rd, and April 30th. We will go from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. each one of those days. So I believe that's all for me at this point. I am going to turn it back over to you, Marcia.
Thank you so much. I now have the pleasure of introducing IUN's Chancellor, Ken Awama. Prior to coming to Northwest Indiana, Chancellor Awama served as Founding Vice President for the Division of Economic Development, Continuing Studies, and Government Relations for the College of Staten Island of the City University of New York. In addition to providing diverse educational programming for 4,000 pre-college, professional certificate, and matriculated students, his division supported faculty research and innovation, government relations, corporate and foundation engagement, specialized student career services, student residential life, workforce development, auxiliary services, and community-based centers and programming. Chancellor Awama is actively involved in local and regional organizations and was recently named to the Managing Board of the Northwest Indiana Forum and the Executive Board of the Alliance for Regional Development. The Chancellor holds a BA in English from the University of New Hampshire, an MA in Labor and Employment Relations from Rutgers University School of Management and Labor Relations, and a JD from Seton Hall Law School. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Ken Awama.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for that great introduction and for all the great work that you do. I so appreciate it. And I'm so pleased to participate in the 31st Annual IU Northwest Forum on Child Abuse and Neglect. I want to share with you, just yesterday I gave a presentation about IU Northwest to the Indiana University Board of Trustees, which I think has relevance, some of my comments has relevance to today's forum. Eric, if you could put up that slide really quick. As part of my presentation, I shared this slide with the board and all those in attendance, which represents our plan to further invest in the engagement of our communities in our role as a region's anchor institution. And that's a great image from our Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. And we plan to do this by leveraging our great strengths as set forth on the left-hand side of the slide and under the concept of energy. And certainly one of our great strengths is our community-based disciplinary expertise on full display today. This is our faculty and student community-engaged research, scholarship, and cultural talents. And then the goal is to unleash all this energy to our audience, our communities, which includes everyone here today. And Eric, you can pull out of that now. It is the process of connecting our energies with the communities to create sustainable collaborations and partnerships where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts, with all boats rising. And frankly, I can't think of a better example of this dynamic and our future than this forum. This year's theme of partnering for the power of prevention says it all. Bringing IU Northwest together with our invaluable community organizations, agencies, experts, and advocates to advance all of our respective missions to ensure that children, our future, are both protected and loved, Indeed, all boats rise. I want to thank Professor Emeritus Rick Hugg for his vision of establishing this forum back in 1991 and for his continued commitment to this cause and conversation. I would also like to send my gratitude to the Forum Planning Committee, our IU Northwest team of the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, the School of Social Work, and the Center for Urban and Regional Excellence, along with the School of Nursing. Thank our great hosts and our great speakers for the many wonderful community partners who have come together today to support this forum. Thank you again for all that you do. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Ellis Dumas, Region 1, Indiana Department of Child Services Director. Hi, Ellis, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chancellor. I appreciate that. And good morning to our lovely Indiana University Northwest community. I am so excited that you guys decided to join us once again this year. Your presence, this forum, is just a gentle reminder to us that we are in this together, no matter what, that this entire community is set to change the way we see child welfare, the way we see the lives of our children in our community. We cannot do this alone, and your presence here lets us know that you're doing it with us. I'm so grateful that you came again, and we're so excited for you to be a part of it this year. This forum going on even last year and this year tells us that not even a pandemic can stand in the way of us being able to change the lives of our community. So without further ado, I get to introduce a very special person here at the Department of Child Services, our Deputy Director of Field Operations, Sarah Sailors. Sarah has worked with families and children for the past 26 years, spending the last 15 of those with DCS. During her tenure, she has held a variety of positions with the responsibilities that range from family case manager, supervisor, and even local office director. In October 2014, she was promoted to Assistant Deputy Director of Field Operations, while she primarily covered the southern part of Indiana. And in March 2018, she became our Deputy Director. In '93, she received her Associates in Arts and Sciences and Criminal Justice from Illinois Central. And in '95, she received her Bachelor's of Science degree in Family Community Services from East Carolina University. And in 2012, she received her MSW from IUPUI. She has worked both in residential and group settings and has worked as a home-based case manager for children and families prior to joining DCS. Sarah and her husband, Jamie, have 3 children together, Madison, Brooks, and Ryan. Please help me celebrate and thank Sarah and welcome aboard. Sarah?
Thank you, Ellis. What a great introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Sailors, Deputy Director of Field Ops, as Ellis said, for the Department of Child Services. It is a pleasure to be able to join you here today. I would just want to say thank you for taking the time to be a part of this 31st IU Northwest Forum on Child Abuse and Neglect. You know, every April we stand alongside our partners and our stakeholders in our community in an effort to raise awareness of the maltreatment of children. While we do this work all year round, not just in April, this is a really important time for us to share our message, hopes, and desires far and wide. The past year has been one where everyone has been forced to adapt to living differently. When the state received Governor Holcomb's stay-at-home order just over a year ago, we at DCS quickly responded to both balance our efforts to provide for the safety of children with new processes and to protect the health of our staff members as much as we possibly could. During the early months of the quarantine, we had to make a number of quick transitions. We added some COVID screening questions to the hotline. We adjusted to working from home. We learned to conduct virtual visits. We secured PPE. And probably most importantly, we learned how to use PPE. So you guys might know that Miss Terry Stigdon, who's our leader here at DCS, is a nurse by education. And so as a social worker, I didn't know much about donning and doffing of PPE, but I have had the opportunity through this pandemic to learn some really new and interesting things. And we could not have done all of this without you. Here at DCS, we have had a centralized hotline for allegations of child abuse and neglect since 2010. And on average, we receive approximately 240,000 reports every year. But during the peak of the pandemic, that trend of calls coming into the hotline changed. we experienced a marked decrease in calls from our top report source, our educators. So instead of just sitting on the sidelines and waiting for children to be harmed, we saw an increase in community involvement, ready to go upstream with us to support families before they fall into that crisis and the well-being of a child is at risk. Community partners, providers stepped up and started home deliveries. They helped ensure children had access to technology they needed for school. Churches all over the state got federal grants to increase the food distribution. And in collaboration with the Prevent Child Abuse Indiana and the Department of Education, we released helpful hints for educators to use to support them in assessing virtually whether a child was at risk of harm. Child Abuse Prevention Month is a time to remind each other that we all play a part in keeping children safe. And one way we can do that is through the Thriving Families Initiative. So the Thriving Families Initiative is a national commitment to safer children and well-being. It's aimed at reshaping child welfare with the focus on prevention and equality. Community support and partnerships become more important than ever. Today creates an opportunity for us to begin challenging ourselves and each other. So I'm going to get the ball rolling and ask that you make some notes of the questions I'm going to pose. Critically think about your role and how you can make a commitment to the Thriving Families Initiative. What can we do so that children can experience well-being and happiness throughout their lives? We know that reports to the hotline can make a difference in stopping maltreatment. But what if? What if more could be done to prevent that call from happening at all? One way we're aiming at rethinking things is to consider the what ifs. What if, instead of just seeing ourselves as mandated reporters, we acted as supporters and considered ourselves mandatory supporters of our neighbors, supporters of our family members, maybe even mandatory supporters of a stranger or two. This means not just knowing and recognizing the signs of child abuse, but understanding that parenting is difficult and every parent needs help at some time. We could have everyone step up as mandatory supporters. We could be better positioned as a state to help before a child is hurt. What if? What if we took action as soon as we saw a need? What if we sought out opportunities to develop relationships with each other? Supporting by modeling positive parenting behaviors and mentoring those who may not have had that chance to learn how to be the parent they want to be for their kids. As you know, most cases here at DCS are due to neglect. Being there for a parent in need could prevent that. Working together is the key to protecting our children. Every year, this is a time to stop and say, how can I help before the child welfare system gets involved? But remember, this isn't just an April issue. We should do our part all year round. So thank you all for everything that you do to support Indiana's children and families. And thank you so much for having me. We couldn't do what we do as an agency without our partners who stand beside us. And one of those vital partners, and one of the most influential women I know, is the Village's president and CEO, child advocate Sharon Pierce. Sharon has a 47-year career serving children and families. She is on the National Board of Directors for both the Child Welfare League of America and Prevent Child Abuse America. She also chairs the IARCA Institute for Excellence Board. And it is my honor to introduce Ms. Sharon Pierce.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Greetings to each and every one of you, as those before me have indicated. It's such a privilege this morning to partner with Sarah Sailors, with Chancellor, with Ellis, in kicking off this 31st annual Indiana University Northwest Forum on the power of prevention. We are all so privileged to benefit from the year-round dedication of Dr. Rick Hugg and his dynamic planning team. Thank you, Rick and team, for your stellar leadership. year after year after year. In partnership with Prevent Child Abuse America, Prevent Child Abuse Indiana has reframed Child Abuse Prevention Month over recent years to focus on the promise that the future and well-being of every child offers. This year, our national theme, Plant the Seeds of a Better Tomorrow for All Children Together, is a powerful call to action. We are charged with investing in the tomorrows of not just some children, but all children. And none of us are asked to do this alone. We're all being asked to do this together, to make a difference together. On April 1st, dedicated Champions for Children planted 1,000 bright blue pinwheels in central Indiana, each of them representing 82 new births in our state, reflective of the 82,000 Hoosier children who will be born this year. I am always in awe when I think of the human capital that 82,000 children who are safe, who are loved, who are educated, who are nourished, and who are nurtured in a supportive family can have in just a few years. On our neighborhoods, our families, our schools, our communities, our businesses, and our state. Clearly, our call to action is to give every child the childhood they deserve, for we know that the impact of our childhood does indeed last a lifetime. We know without a doubt that when a child is raised and nurtured with love, respect, and understanding, it will positively impact that child throughout their life. These children are more successful in school and work. It is easier for them to develop and keep friendships. They develop that much needed sense of self-confidence. They are better prepared to sustain a strong marriage, and they are able to parent more effectively. A few years ago, Sandy Runkle, our Prevent Child Abuse Indiana program director, and I were asked to be a part of a Prevent Child Abuse Month celebration at the Pendleton Correctional Facility. Offenders there had donated much of their previous month's allowances in March to purchase and plant a pinwheel garden at the front entrance, so it would greet their children and their families when they came to visit. One of the offenders came up to me after we had spoken and said, "You know what I love about a pinwheel? It takes action for them to move. You can blow on them, the wind can propel them, or a child can run with them. But it also takes action to impact the life of a child." Remember that old adage, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something to prevent child abuse? That's exactly what these gentlemen themselves, offenders of horrific crimes, and most of them abused as a child, did. They developed beautifully written and illustrated baby journals for the first-time parents in Indiana's Healthy Families program. And I'm going to do a little show and tell today, just like we used to have in school. These beautiful journals were developed by those offenders. They also worked with another correctional facility at the Wabash Valley to develop beautiful quilts, baby quilts, centered around a blue pinwheel. Talk about making a difference. As a small way of saying thank you to these men whose home was behind bars, we shared some of the heartfelt praise that the new moms and dads who had received these journals and quilts had shared. One mother said, "I was in tears when I saw the toys and the baby journal. And then when I unfolded the quilt, I lost it. My baby boy has something brand new, thanks to you." Another mom exclaimed, "I could never afford to buy a baby book or a beautiful quilt at the store. I can't believe that somebody who doesn't even know me and my daughter would do this for us." A first-time dad said, "I can't provide a lot of things I wish I could for our twins. You've helped me feel like I'm a better father for them." And finally, a couple said, "You all make us want to pay it forward and help someone else. As soon as we're able, That's exactly what we're going to do. What seeds will you plant this year to create brighter tomorrows for all of Indiana's children? Perhaps you'll plant your own pinwheel garden. Perhaps you'll nurture that child next door or down the street who you know is hungry for a little extra love. Perhaps you'll ask your child or your grandchild's teacher who in their class needs a little extra support and then stand in the gap. Maybe you'll collect canned goods or diapers for your local food pantry. Get your faith community to provide a monthly meal and children's activities for those selfless kinship caregivers in our community. Or perhaps you'll just start the conversation with someone about how hard it is to be being a parent, especially in a pandemic. As our nation's poet laureate, Amanda Gorman, challenged us and inspired us on that January presidential inauguration day, let's not only be the light, let's see the light and carry it forward. I know that each and every one of you are going to do just that, not just today, not just in April, but throughout this year. Thank you so much for showing up today. I see we have 164 folks with us, champions for children all. And I'd like to turn it back to yet another champion for children who you've met earlier, Liz Guzman Arredondo, a longtime champion and a dear friend. Liz?
Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much. You are such an example for all of us, Sharon. I'm very pleased that you were able to join us today. So our planning committee gets together about once a month, and we start to think about each year's workshop. And again, this year's is our 31st annual Partnering for the Power of Prevention. We get together and we start thinking about who can we bring on? Who can we help to bring here to Northwest Indiana to educate, to share? And some of the questions that the group was asking ourselves this year was, you know, we talk about adverse childhood experiences, and what we were looking for is, we know all about ACEs, right? So what happens after we've learned about our clients, our children that have experienced ACEs? What do we do to help, and how do we carry out the approach? What is it that we do now that we are aware of all these ACEs in our children's and our clients' lives? How do we take the science of ACEs and translate it into action in support of those with those high number of ACEs? So today I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Stacy Gagnon. Stacy is a foster mom. She's an adoptive mom. She's a blogger, an educator. She's a published children's book author, and she's a registered nurse and international speaker. In the green room today, she was just letting us know that she has presented in Russia. So I'm so excited to have her here with us today. Stacy is a creator and director of Trauma Lens Care. She provides training on trauma-informed practices, substance abuse, and ACEs in schools, jails, and public forums. Trauma Lens Care was created as a way for first responders to communicate with schools when families are involved with the police. Stacy and her husband, Darren, founded Lost Sparrows Incorporated in 2016 to alleviate the flow of children into orphanages in Eastern Europe. She has traveled across the US and Europe speaking and training on the effects of trauma. You can find out more about Trauma Lens Care at www.traumalenscare.org and about Lost Sparrows at www.lostsparrows.org. Tracy has a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing, cum laude in 2014. She graduated from Northern Arizona University. She was awarded the 2014 NAU Nursing Program Compassion Award. She was awarded in 2014 the NAU Nursing Program Leadership Award. She graduated in 1997 from Grace College with the Bachelor of Science in Education, cum laude. I'm so excited to have Stacy here with us today. Welcome, welcome.
Well, what a fantastic introduction. I really want to mainly introduce myself as a mother as well. I am coming today to speak to you not as a nurse or as a teacher, but I want to come and talk to you as a foster parent and an adoptive parent today, and talk to you about ACEs and talk to you about what I've come to learn having done 15 years of fostering. You know, I remember 15 years ago getting the paper in the mail, the certificate that said that I was a foster parent, and within that paper was the idea that I actually knew what I was doing. That, you know, I had done the hours and the trainings and all of the things to be able to know what I was doing. And I think when we look at life and we look at experience, we see how we have good intentions and we know what we want to do and we have a picture of what it's going to look like. But oftentimes good intention runs straight into the brick wall of reality. And so in my mind, I was teaching third grade at the time, and I had in my picture of what it was going to look like in my home. Honestly, I was thinking a school-age child, probably pretty well behaved, wouldn't destroy property, you know, wouldn't have biological parents that maybe I was afraid of, definitely was not going to be maybe drug exposed or had ever been inappropriately touched in any way. And honestly, I laugh as I'm saying this because, you know, we all can laugh when I say this because that is not the reality of foster care. But in my mind, I had created this picture of what I thought it might look like. And so one of my first placements, I'm going to call her Jasmine, 5 years old, knobby knees, covered and caked in dirt. She had lived homeless in the woods. And we got the call for her. And oftentimes when receiving a call, you don't get much history. And so we were told this was a 5-year-old girl who had autism and her younger sibling. And right away I thought, oh, special needs. I don't know. Okay, I guess so. And so she walks in my home with the case manager, and she proceeds to just flap and spin, and was echolalic, where she was just repeating words and phrases and not making a lot of sense. And her little brother was handed to me, and I was given a garbage bag of clothing. And that began a very interesting journey for me. You know, all of the boxes that I had ticked off on what I felt capable and willing to do were slowly kind of crumbling at that moment. So I determined, you know, I'm going to go ahead and I told my husband, I'm going to take the 5-year-old Jasmine with me. Now we're going to go to the grocery store because I didn't have diapers, I didn't have milk, I didn't have bottles, I didn't have the things that her younger brother needed at the moment. And so I go to the local grocery store, and she's flapping and spinning all around my cart. And we get up to the checkout line, and I'm standing there, and the checker looks down, and she sees the little girl, and she says, "Oh, hi, sweetie, what is your name?" And in that moment, she froze, and she made eye contact with the checker, and she said, "My name is Jesus Christ. My name is Jesus Christ." And then she started screaming, Jesus Christ, over and over. And I remember being like, in that moment, you know, when something like that happens, it seems like external noise suddenly drops, and all of a sudden the store is silent, and everyone is looking at me with this child whose name is Jesus Christ. And I get to the car, and I'm sitting there, and I called my husband, and I said, apparently we're fostering Jesus Christ. And you know, at that point, we felt very overwhelmed. And it seemed that way with every placement. It's that first few months is just this mayhem and madness and jockeying for some type of normalcy. And you're trying to figure out what to do. And the beautiful thing with this little girl is we enrolled her in kindergarten, and she lived in our home for a year. And over the year, what we saw was just this picture of a child whose behaviors were born out of a response of ACEs or trauma. Autism can look like severe trauma. And this little girl started to emerge from this flapping and echolalia and stimming all the time, and completely locked in her whole own world. and to a little girl who I noticed flinched when I touched her, and I noticed would weep silently when I gave her a bath in the bathtub, and who my husband could not go near that side of the house when she was in her room because she would start shrieking. And we started recognizing that while she was homeless, her mom did not realize that she had been being used by many men. And as the stories emerged through her behaviors, we started to bring in the supports to help her in what she was dealing in. And she ended up transitioning to an aunt after being with us a year, and she was a completely different child. She was functioning on grade level. She could carry on conversations. She had stopped stimming. The echolalia had stopped as well, but she still had deep trauma. And about 5 years from her leaving my home, I got a call from her aunt who said, she started talking. What do I do? She started telling and naming names and saying all the things that happened. And I said, take her down to the police station and let her talk to the officer. Let her know that it's not okay what happened to her. And so she taught me so much in understanding that the behaviors we see in our kids, and looking at her, and I'm thinking, wow, what's wrong with you? Or what is going on with you? And starting to recognize that it wasn't about that. It was about what has happened to you, and how can I help you best process this now instead of processing it in 15 years. And so through the years, our checklist changed. The checklist of, wow, I can't handle a child with special needs, or wow, I can't handle a child whose biological parents might be in prison and could be scary, or wow, I can't handle a child who has big behaviors and destroys property. All of that changed because I changed the lens of how I viewed children that came in my home. Because the scarier the behavior, the more scared the child was. And so I laugh because when I started fostering, I was a perfect parent. And then I had foster children, and that's the end of that. And so today I want to speak with you about experiences and my understanding of what we do with ACEs and how we support a brain that has had trauma. Because what we understand is that scared kids do scary things, and if we don't intervene, they become hurt adults who hurt people. I love to share all the ways I failed, because I feel like if I can share my failures with you, then maybe you can say, wow, I don't want to do that. So I had been fostering for about 8 years, and I had spent many, many days and nights walking the floor with infants who were coming off of being drug exposed in utero. I had spent time watching the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 6-year-old waiting for mommy to show up for a visit, and mommy couldn't get out of bed that day. And I had seen these kids come in my home who were severely, severely affected by their parents, and I was angry. I was angry. And I felt like my anger was the self-righteous anger. I would like, yeah, get your act together. And so at the time I was a director of public health nursing, and I went to my boss and I said, I want to start a program in the jail. I want to start teaching inmates how to parent. I want to go in there and I want them to understand that they need to choose their kids. Because in my mind, I thought that these people were not like me. And I thought their drug use was a conscious choice for them, and that they needed to learn self-control. And what often happens when we have self-righteous anger is that we end up learning something very hard. And so I stepped into the jail, and it was the very first time I went in, and I was sitting knee to knee with an pregnant mom who was 8 months along. And it's very, very, it's a very interesting thing to sit there and see someone who's got, their orange jumpsuit on and a very large pregnant belly, and yet she looked like she was in her 50s. And you could tell life had been hard. And I'm sitting there thinking like, well, I want to have a conversation with her because I need to get to the part where I tell her she needs to choose her kid, right? I need to get to that part. And I'm sitting and I'm making conversation, and I noticed this tattoo on her arm. And I said, wow, that's a nice tattoo. What's that tattoo for? And do you see where right here I'm using my motivational interview skills? Like, I'm not going to come across like I'm judgmental. I'm going to go ahead and, you know, find some common ground, and then I'm going to come around in a non-judgmental way to help her to choose her children, right? And again, I'm looking at this, and I say this to her, and she looked me straight on in the eyes, and she said, Stacy, that's my mother's name, and that's the day I killed my mom. And I just remember, like, honestly being very taken aback, because I don't remember in any of my trainings what the next comment should be from me, right? And so I sat there in silence for a little bit, and I'm usually not at a loss for words. And I said, can you tell me more about that? And then I just listened, because I had gone in to talk to them, and I recognized in that moment I needed to shut my mouth and I needed to listen. And she said, you know, I grew up, my mom was a nurse, my dad was a cop, and I knew something was different about me. I knew something was different about me, and I would ask them, because my parents were older and they seemed very different than me. And I was like, was I adopted? Why am I different? Why do I feel different? Why do I feel like there's something inside of me that's different? And they would tell me, no, nope, you're our child. You're our daughter. You're our daughter. She goes, until the age of 13, when a woman came into my life and introduced herself as my biological mother without my parents, my adoptive parents now knowing. She said, and her name was Terry. And she told me that that she had lost me to the system and that she wanted to be my mom. And so at this point, as a 13-year-old, I thought, my whole life has been a lie. This is my mother. And my mother introduced me to the drug, the warm hug I had been missing my whole life. And we started using opioids together, and that just lit a wildfire. And through the years, I lived on and off with my mother. I lost 4 children to the DCS system. And I have struggled every day with addiction. And I'll get clean, and then I'll relapse. And I'll go to jail, and then I'll get out. And she said, and it all culminated into the day that I went home and I had purchased a batch of meth for my mother and I to use together. And I brought it into the house to her, and I left it, and I was going to go out and get some food and snacks for us for the weekend. And when I came back, I found my mother dead on the floor. She had overdosed because it was a bad batch. She goes, and so I put this tattoo on as a reminder that I killed my mother. And then I remember just looking at her, and I'm literally with tears streaming down my face. And I was thinking, what conscious choice did a 13-year-old make to begin using drugs? What conscious choice did she have when her mother invited her to use? And her losing children to the system, I watched in her eyes a mother who loves her kids. And here she is, 8 months pregnant, and her sentence was 15 years. And so she recognized that this was the time she had with her baby, but that soon after the baby was born, she would not touch or hold her child for 15 years. And so I left that day, and I recognized that my thought process of what substance use and addiction and lack of parenting and the system and all of those things were shattered by one woman showing me a tattoo of the day she killed her mom. So then I'm teaching these classes, and I have taught classes to hundreds of male and hundreds of female inmates. And I started giving them the ACE quiz. And what absolutely astounded me was the average score in my county jail was 7. And the average age of drug use onset was 12. And the average age that they started using alcohol and marijuana was 8. And then I saw this common thread of sexual abuse and physical abuse and abandonment, and all of the ACEs numbers just piled up. And I listened to these inmates and their stories and their pain, and I recognized that drug use is an external attempt to medicate internal pain. And when you start at the age of 12 and you start using alcohol at the age of 8, you tell me what choice is made in doing this when you are a child. I think it's important to recognize that 90% of the prison population has one ACE. Okay, and so I'm telling you that the average score was 7. And we understand the ACEs study and we look at it and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. And so I left thinking this is so overwhelming. But what was so interesting in working with inmates is that they literally would hear the information about ACEs and then they would start sharing and they would say to me, I know this is not an excuse, but what I recognize now is that it's not that there's something that's wrong with me, something that's happened to me. And we understand that that's the whole premise behind ACEs, right? Is it's not that there's something wrong with you, it's something happened to you. And so then I started teaching how their perceptions and how they handled stress and how their brains were different or altered because of what had happened to them early on. If you want to read anything super interesting about substance use, Matei does a lot of TED Talks, but he also has a book called The Realm of the Hungry Ghosts. And he really drilled it home for me in understanding addiction and how we cannot truly understand addiction unless we ask the question, what relief does the addict find? And so this graph, to me, is what happens when we don't step in and start working with ACEs and helping kids process things. We see in childhood the developmental delays and expulsions. And then we move into adolescence and it upticks with delinquency, mental health, sexual activity, drugs and alcohol violence. And then we get to adulthood and it's psychiatric problems, drug use, alcohol, crime, and criminality that ends up in jail. And I end up working with them and seeing that the relief wasn't found. We didn't give them the relief in childhood or adolescence, and so they're still searching into adulthood. These statistics to me are what just absolutely stagger me. So my last placement 2 years ago were 2 babies, a newborn and an 18-month-old. And this was in Arizona, and I will tell you that they were just adopted last week, which is so awesome. However, they were moved 4 times before the adoption. And that was because the parents were continuing to move as well from city to city. And so we look at the statistics of moving foster youth and what happens when they don't have family and stability, and we start seeing staggering statistics in our foster youth. But then we look at ACEs, and it's even more staggering when we see with 4 or more ACEs, you're 7 times more likely to go to prison. You're 5.6 times more likely to engage in illicit drug use, and you're 15 times more likely to attempt suicide. And I will tell you that stepping into the jail and listening to stories from these men and women, it matched these statistics, but the statistics became a name and the statistics became a story. And these kids were the kids I was teaching in my classroom. These kids once sat in a 3rd grade classroom, just like the one I was teaching in. And I recognized, oh my word, I've been missing this. And so if we don't ask questions, we will never hear answers. And I want to take a moment and I want to share with you right now a letter from the woman with the tattoo, because she gave me permission to share the tattoo and her story, but she also wrote a letter that she wants me to read to anybody that is working within the system. It's easy to judge a book by its cover. When you meet me on paper, the words represent a person even I would not like, a person I would not want to have a thing to do with. And sadly, I feel these words are not the person I am. I encourage you to look from a different perspective. I am not asking you to take a walk in my shoes to the point of excusing my part in my incarceration. I ask you to know that there are factors to every situation that lead us all the places we normally wouldn't go. I never woke up and said, I want to be a heroin addict, lose my kids, and be the hand that killed my mother. I've gone through this process of losing my kids to DCS 4 times and have listened over and over to people brand me a piece of crap and then turn around and comment on how wonderful my children are. They refuse to see that my children are a piece of me. That piece of crap is the parent of the child they are adopting. We are not separate. I'm not downplaying the impact I've had on my kids, and I'm absolutely ashamed of my selfishness. I am a mom that loves her children and struggles every damn day with addiction. I am asking again that you read between the lines on paper and truly see my children. And when I looked at her, I looked at the broken girl who sat there at 13, knowing that she felt different, and joining her mother in addiction because she wanted to belong and understood abandonment on a level that none of us will understand unless we've been through foster care or unless we've been adopted. And I started to realize that trauma or ACEs is not about what happens to you. It's not the external thing that's happening to you. It is what is happening inside of you as a result of it. So when we recognize that it's about what's internal and what's happening inside of our kids, then we can actually say, ACEs, this is what we need to do. I hear all the time about, well, I had a hard childhood and I'm okay. I'm resilient. I bounced back. I had a dad that was an alcoholic. I had a dad that hit me, but I'm okay. I didn't turn to drugs. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And so here's where I want to drill down into some of the science, because I feel like when we can understand this on the level of the brain and the neural connections, then maybe we can understand where resiliency comes from. Because I feel like there's this disconnect in understanding where resiliency comes from. Because I'll ask that. I present all over the world, but also all around the US in all the child welfare systems. And typically, the answer I get is, well, resiliency comes from people around you as you're growing up, building that into you, which there's a component of that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. But I want to go back and I really want to talk about where resiliency is downloaded and what that does to the brain and why we see and understand ACEs and how people can be resilient from ACEs and how they struggle. Okay? So I am hoping that you can see this pretty well. All right, and so we understand that when we are looking at the brain of a child, brain actually attachment is the big thing, and that actually begins in utero. We tend to kind of forget or want to think that a child that's born is like a blank slate. Well, in all actuality, all of our senses are online by 20 weeks in utero. So a baby in utero by 20 weeks already is tasting and smelling the mother. Here's the heart rate, here's the gurgle of the stomach, here's the mother's voice, is bathed in either cortisol or oxytocin, right? The love or the stress hormone, is already very intimately involved in understanding the mother on a level that doesn't happen anywhere outside of that, all right? And so when we think about what I call a green brain child, okay, a green brain child, we are created with millions of neurons that are waiting to be connected in our brain. And the brain actually, it develops from the bottom to the top, okay? So we have all of these million neural cells that are waiting to be connected by environment and by experience, all right? And so attachment or serve and return actually builds this framework, or the basement of the brain. And so what we do is we look at how this happens, all right? So let's say, well, like I said, we're taking what we call a green brain child, all right? And so a green brain child is going to have connections that are forming every single time a need is met. So in utero, mom is excited about having the baby, green attachment. Mom is has prenatal care, green attachment. Okay, mom is supported by family, green attachment. Mom is exercising and has good diet, green attachment. Right, baby is born. At the moment of birth, the baby, we see the first picture of what we call external attachment. The baby cries. And serve and return means that we see the need and we meet it. So mom interprets the need, baby's placed on mom's chest, baby stops crying, okay? And so we start seeing every single time mom meets the need of baby, we are going to see what we call a green attachment, okay? So baby cries, mom thinks, oh, baby must be hungry, feeds baby. Baby cries, mom said, oh, baby needs diaper change, mom changes diaper. And this occurs thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And so we see all these connections that are green in the basement of the brain, all right? Now, why this is important is that this child, this framework is actually giving the child what's called an internal narrative. And that internal narrative of a green brain child is saying, I am loved, I am worthy, and the world can be trusted. Because when a baby cries and someone responds and meets the need, they are seeing the predictability and they are building what are called trust bonds. Okay, so they're understanding then that their world can be trusted and that they are loved and worthy. Now, when we think about a red brain child, we can look at that here and we can say, okay, a red brain child, mom doesn't want a baby, okay? She's pregnant, does not want the baby. So we see a red connection occur, all right? And then we say, okay, baby daddy does not want a baby. In fact, he's in jail right now, okay? Or mom is homeless, or mom doesn't have support at all, or mom is working 60 hours a week trying to make ends meet. And we see the baby that's being basically bathed in cortisol, all right? And so then maybe the baby is born, and mom loves the baby, but she struggles. She's struggling. Maybe she has postpartum. Baby cries, mom doesn't come. Or baby cries and mom doesn't know how to help the baby, all right? Or baby cries and baby is just hearing fights with mom and dad. And so we see within all of these red neural connections are occurring within the brain. And so then what is important about this is that the inner narrative for this child is saying, because of the thousands and thousands of repetitions that are not happening in a consistent manner, is I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, and this world cannot be trusted, right? So what does this have to do with resiliency? What does this have to do with resiliency, right? When we look across the lifespan of a child with a green brain, and we talk about ACEs, this framework is built in utero to about the age of 2, okay? So this framework is occurring before the age of 2. A child, let's say this red brain or green brain child, at the age of 4, the parents get divorced. That's an ACE. This child's going to filter his parents or her parents' divorce through the basement of their brain that says, that's okay, I am loved, I am worthy, and my parents and the world can be trusted. And say at the age of 9, this child's mom gets a new boyfriend and the boyfriend is using and there's domestic violence in the home. Okay, there's 2 ACEs. He's going to filter his experience at the age of 9 through the brain that says, all right, I am still loved, I am still worthy, and the world is predictable and trusted. And then maybe at the age of 16, mom goes to prison. He's still going to filter through the brain that says, I am loved, I'm worthy, the world can be trusted. Okay, but now let's move to a red brain child. A red brain child, at the age of 4, the parents get divorced. And the child believes, that's all right, of course that happened. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. I'm sure it's something that I did, and I can't trust the world anyway. Nothing's predictable. And we see behaviors. And then at the age of 9, mom gets a new boyfriend and child's living in hypervigilance because this guy's scary and he's using drugs. But he's going to actually be filtering all of this through a red brain that says, that's all right. I've got to take care of myself because I can't trust the world. And you know what? I'm worthless anyway. I'm not even lovable. Okay. And he's in my classroom. He's sitting in my 3rd grade classroom, and rewards and consequences aren't working for this kid. And I can't seem to reach this kid. And all I see is this anger and this rage and these big behaviors. And I don't know what's wrong with this kid, but I'm just going to keep plugging away, trying to, I don't know, give him recess time out, put his name on the board with a check mark. I don't know. But guess what? He's filtering everything through this brain that tells him, I'm not lovable and worthy anyway. Of course my teacher doesn't like me. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy for them. Then at 16, mom goes to jail. Doesn't matter, he's been surviving on his own anyway. Only person he can trust is himself. And so when I hear I was resilient, my guess is that there was someone that was helping you build a green brain. Because what we know through science is that resiliency is downloaded through the attachment process in utero to about the age of 2 is when we have that framework built. And so when our children are the most vulnerable is when they are the youngest. And unfortunately, that is when we presume the most resilience, because I truly believed babies coming into my home would forget. I thought they would forget the bad things that happened to them, but the body keeps the score. The body keeps the score, and they carry it on a cellular level. And so when we look at unhealthy attachment, or we look at a red brain, what is important is if you think about attachment like nutrition, and I have a baby and I'm not feeding them correctly, none of us have a problem thinking that that child might have issues with bone density when they're adult. None of us have issues thinking that child, when they grow up, they might have other physical issues because of the lack of nutrition they didn't have as a child or a newborn. But it's the same for our children with attachment. Attachment is like nutrition. It literally feeds the brain. It literally gives us a basement or a foundation for how we perceive the world and how we move about and process things. And so when we have unhealthy attachment and we have blocked trust, then our life is compromised because we don't perceive the world like someone with a green brain. And so when you can go and have that starting point when working with kids, then I can look at a child like Jasmine in my home and recognize that her perception and how she is processing things is altered and changed, because I used to believe my love could fix it. But we can't fix an altered brain. We can support and give tools to a brain that has been altered, but we cannot go in and redo the basement of a brain. So when we step in, we're going to help what become maladaptive behaviors for our kids not transition into adulthood. And that's the goal, right? That is the goal in what we do and in the work that we do. These two quotes are incredibly important to hear and understand, because as a nurse, and I work in pediatric mental health, I look at our system and I look at mental health. And if you drill down mental health to the very core of what it is, all psychiatric disorders are based in the idea that we don't have the ability to calm ourselves or regulate our stress. We don't have the ability to calm ourselves down. And so if you look at Alan Shore and read what he says right here, affect dysregulation, the lack of ability to calm ourselves down, is seen to be a fundamental mechanism in all psychiatric disorders. Then, dysregulation of a maltreated child's major stress system likely contributes to adverse brain development and leads to psychopathology. Right? And so we look at our kids and we see that they've been exposed to all of these ACEs. And so to me, the key to helping a red brain child is to give them the tools to understand their brain and manage stress. We give them the tools to be able to calm themselves down. But that can't happen when we presume resiliency in them. That can't happen when we pretend that, okay, you're a blank slate when you come to my home, and I'm going to just parent you like I did my biological trust bonded green brain baby, and then you're going to be okay. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it is an excellent read. But I think it's really important if we look at this quote, especially the second paragraph, okay? This is so true. People take drugs to make that persistent sense of heartbreak and gut wrench disappear. And they cut themselves to make it disappear. And they have sex with anyone to make it disappear. And once you have these horrible sensations in your body, you'll do anything to make it go away. So our job is to help them have an adaptive coping skill instead of maladaptive. And I use this image of a goldfish shark when I go and I teach in the jail. And I talk about the behaviors that we see in our other adults or in children that are scary. Okay, so think about a child in the system, and think about a child who is raging and is disrespectful and is destroying property and is incredibly hard to reach, and we call them porcupines, right? But think about this child, and I want you to think about that shark fin being the behaviors. And remember when I said earlier that scared children do scary things? But the reality of the shark fin is that we have to actually look below the surface of the water and see them as scared goldfish. And I remember showing this to some women inmates, and one of them said, I wish when I was in junior high and high school that my teacher would have known that I went to school every day scared to death, even though I acted like I knew it all and I was such a jerk. She goes, because if someone would have said to me what's going on or asked me, she goes, I would have told them. I would have told them what was happening. And unfortunately, when as a teacher or when as foster parents we are dealing and just only seeing the shark fin, we're actually missing the key component of how we heal kids. And that's ignoring behavior and seeing the need or the relief that that goldfish is looking for. So I'm going to talk to you about how do we create green pathways. And I'm going to tell you about my baby that's a green pathway. This is my son, Israel, and you talk about a red-brained child. He is the picture of a red-brained child. Israel was born in Eastern Europe in an orphanage, and because he cannot use his legs, he was placed at birth and into an orphanage setting where he received minimal care. He actually lived in what was called the section of the malformations. When I met him the first time, he was literally tied into his crib because they said as a 4-year-old that he was naughty and tried to get out. So this was a way to contain him all day long. So at 4, he sat all day long tied into a crib. He received 2 meals a day that were liquid because it's faster and easier to feed a child with liquid than to actually teach them chew and swallow. He had never been outside. He had 0 language in Bulgarian. He didn't even identify things. So he, upon meeting him, I'll be honest, I was scared to death to bring him home because I recognized that this was beyond any level of anything I had ever seen in the state foster system. And honestly, I've seen a lot of awful hard things. And so on the left is a picture of Israel sitting on a couch in the orphanage when I first met him. And you will see that he was the size of a 1-year-old. And absolutely sickly. The picture on the right is when we brought him home, and that is literally the first day he went outside, and he pitched his face up to the sun, and he sat for 20 minutes, and my husband snapped that photo of a boy who had never felt the sun on his face until then. And so I will be honest, I was scared to death on how in the world could I fix this? Because I already understood in the foster system how things were so difficult and so hard. And I thought, I can't repair this. But I do believe in love, and I do believe in hope, and I do believe that we can create new pathways, because if that were not true, I wouldn't have 7 kids. I would have stopped after 1 adoption. And so we brought Israel home, and we started to create green pathways in his brain. And what we understand about the brain and the science behind the brain is that there are 2 things and 2 ways that we can create pathways in a brain that is starting out red, and that is relationship and environment. Okay, and so I'm going to break it down on how we worked with Israel and a lot of the kids in our home. Okay, so first of all, you cannot leverage relationship when you first meet a child. You don't have relationship with them. So Israel came to us without relationship. And he actually didn't even have a context for relationship. So that was interesting, because most kids coming into my home, there was a context for relationship. There was a context for a mother and a father. My child was raised by a building. And so we started with environment, and we learned this over the years in our home. And this is what we teach foster families. This is what we teach teachers, and this is actually what we teach those that are substance using individuals. You start with environment. And so first thing is this: schedule and routine. We become Groundhog Day in our home. Lunch is at the same time, snack is at the same time, bath is at the same time. We don't go anywhere. Everything in the home becomes so blasé, mundane, routine, that the brain is able to calm enough to start getting some predictable sequencing, because that's what it's about. Remember in the beginning with the red brain, there's that lack of predictability. And so the world's not able to be trustworthy. So I have to create a world that is trustworthy, and I have to do that in my home. And so in the foster world or the adopt world, a lot of that is called cocooning. And so we also educated the people that came in our home that they were not to take on any of the care of our children, that they were going to what we call privilege the parent. So if my child needed a drink, or my child wanted a hug, or my child wanted to do something, they would privilege me as the parent and say, oh, you know what, mommies do that. Or nope, daddies can do that. Why don't you ask mommy to get you a drink? And so schedule and routine. We had incredibly organized spaces with minimal things. You know, I think the first thought in foster care, or even with a kid coming in that's lived in some severe neglect or hard things, is we want to give them the world. You want to give them the world, but unfortunately they can't handle the world. The world is chaos, and so to have a room full of colors and toys and all those things is incredibly overwhelming. And so we learned to start with like 2 toys, and that was it. And we backed it down with the stimulation. Okay, we limited technology. We didn't even let them on technology. All right, and then we made sure that we were helping them exercise, that they listened a lot to music and rhythm, because if you think about the in utero experience, it is the very perfect picture of co-regulation. So a mother co-regulates a baby in utero, and part of that is through rhythm. They actually hear the heart rate, right? They hear the rhythm of life. They're walking to the rhythm with their mother. And if you think about a newborn crying, if you watch next time a newborn start crying and someone is sitting down, typically the first thing that we do is we stand up to rock them or move them. Okay, there's reasoning behind that, because in utero, you are walked and held, and this is mimicking that, right? And so then also that rhythm, we actually end up swaying or rocking to the rate of our heart rate. And so we used a lot of music and rhythm with our kids when they first came home, or first came into our home. And then we also looked at sensory support, because we can't negate that smell is connected to memory. We can't negate that on a sensory level, we can have a lot of chaos going on and not even recognize it or realize it. And so we started looking at our house on a sensory level and making sure that it was calm in that way as well. All right, and so as we made this environment that was incredibly like the movie Groundhog Day, same, we started then to build in relationship, okay? And relationship is the key. Relationship is how we can take a child or an adult with a red brain and we can help them, where we can say, listen, you are worthy, you are lovable, and this world can be predictable and you can trust this world. And so we learn to start sharing emotions with our kids in our home. We learn to start saying, wow, I can see that you're angry. I would be upset too. And validating those emotions, right? And saying when we were upset, wow, mommy's feeling sad right now because of this. And you start mirroring that because they didn't learn it early on. And then we started to interpret their behaviors for them, because someone that has a high number of ACEs or a high level of trauma, they actually are not comfortable living within their own body. And so a lot of times what we'll see is feelings happen to them, emotions happen to them. And instead, we started interpreting behaviors and naming the emotion that was occurring and talking about what their body was doing in that moment so that there could be a connect between the body and the mind. Because that's what's happening in a child with trauma, is that they can't live in that space. It's uncomfortable. It's that gut-wrenching hurt and heartache. So we have to help teach them by interpreting behavior and sitting with them in that hard space to help them to own that and process it. And so there's something that we call sliding door moments with our kids. Because remember that shark fin? What we are traditionally taught with the shark fin is that we punish or we discipline the behavior. And what I want people to see is that the behavior, that's actually a symptom. The behavior is a symptom. And as a nurse, I look at symptoms and if you came in with a weeping wound on your arm, I'm not just going to slap a white bandage over it and tell you, I've covered up the symptom, it looks good now. No, I actually have to dig in there and figure out why you have a festering wound. I have to get to the splinter that's deep in your arm. And so when we have what we call sliding door moments, which are those moments with kids that are kind of scary, we have to teach foster parents, and we have to teach those that work with people, those are not scary moments. Those need to be your moments to connect in emotion. Because here's the deal. As a teacher, and as a nurse, and as a parent, and all these things, I've always been taught that I'm going to use my thinking cognitive brain to speak to the emotional brain of a child. Okay, so a child that's living out of their basement emotional brain down here is not listening to my cognitive brain. And so it doesn't work. That's why across the span of time, the words, could you please calm down, to a toddler that's throwing a fit, it doesn't work, right? And so we've learned to see those moments as a moment to not shut the door on the emotion and get rid of the behavior. We learn to step through the door and sit in it and do what we call hold the space. And holding the space is sitting in that gut wrench and that heartache and that fear and all of that stuff that's driving them and the symptoms that are scary. And with nonverbal channels, I am speaking regulation. I am speaking stress management. I am speaking and teaching through my nonverbal skills how to calm the body. And what happens is that the child will start notching down and the brain starts getting calm and they're better able to access the thinking brain. And in those moments, it's not easy. It's difficult. It's hard. And it's scary. But when you learn to do it, all of a sudden you see change, because if we just play whack-a-mole with the shark fin, then we're always going to be dealing with the shark fin, and the shark fin is going to end up sitting across from Stacey Gagnon in the jail someday because they didn't learn the skills to calm down. And so we did this with Israel, and Israel is an amazing testament in my home to what we can do in the power of relationship. My son is now speaking, eating a normal diet. He goes to school. Just last week, he wrote a letter to his principal asking them to build him an accessible playground so he and his friends can all play together. And he read it out loud. And I look at him and I think, there's hope. We can take the most red-brained kid and there is hope. But we recognize that Israel had to be parented very differently. I had to give Israel tools. We had to give Israel the ability to calm and regulate himself so that he could start accessing that learning brain. And so we say, and I'm going to end with this, that the cure is in the pain. Our capacity to destroy one another is matched by our capacity to heal one another. And relationship has hurt my kids, but I believe that relationship cures can help them as well. And if we can teach a different method, if we can look at how do we regulate and use predictable environment to calm brains, and how we can change social conditions to support relationships and environments so that children and adults can feel safe, then what I believe is that we can actually change and help heal kids before we get to the end of the stream, like was said earlier, because I don't believe in just standing downstream and pulling adults out. It's so hard at that point. I believe that we can step in with our kids and we can affect social change with our red brain kids. And that's what our foster kids are dealing in, is red brain and altered brains. And so I'm so grateful that you guys were able to be here with me today and listen. And I hope there's some questions that you have. I know I gave you a lot of information at one time, but I hope you also understand that there's hope in this message, that I do believe that relationship is the cure.
Thank you, Stacy, so much for your presentation. This has been enjoyable, very informative. We've had some wonderful comments along the way. I think the fact that you talked about red brain children and creating green pathways has opened our eyes and gave us more insight about working with our children. Thank you for walking us through your biases, as you did with the young lady in the jail, and how it turned into a powerful lesson of the impact of ACEs on individuals' lives. We've had some wonderful comments along the way that I would just like to share with you. I also want to encourage others, if you do have questions, please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A section. So far our comments have been, I love the down-to-earth presentation. All the information was very understandable. You make the references to the brain, but gives real-life examples. Thank you so much for your story. So important that you're sharing this information. Someone said, wow, you're talking my language. I've been in other workshops you presented, and today is completely fresh and on point. We also have a comment that just says, great job. You've been doing an outstanding job. This is something we need to hear and talk about. We love the goldfish and shark analogy with great information, and we would like to use that going forward. Again, the goldfish is a great emotional picture, and it helps us to understand what's really going on with our children. Another comment we have is that children just need the opportunity to talk about experiencing trauma that happens to them. And something I think that we forget, that children need to talk, that they have layers just like we have layers. We have to peel our onion, they have to peel their onion as well. So we have had more than one request for you to post the book that you've referred to several times. And we'll put that in our chat. If you could just give us the name and that information, we'll make sure that the participants have that information.
You know, if I could jump and say one thing I want to add on, because, you know, I work with foster and adopt families around the world. And what has been an interesting thing is that I'll be asked, like, I haven't told my kid about their past. I can't tell my kid about their past. I can't tell them about the awful things that happened because it will just bring it up. And especially when trauma, or when we see things happen to kids early on before they're verbal. And so one of the things I think is really important is that kids have to understand and know their narrative, and that we have to, like, they lived it. It's not like you talking with them and helping them understand their narrative is going to traumatize them. They have already lived the trauma. It actually is giving them the words, and you can assign the emotion to what happened to them, so that it's not that there's something wrong with them. And so I appreciate, like, that someone had mentioned that in the chat, because I think it's really scary as a foster parent. And I was the same way, thinking, I can't tell my kid that this happened in their home before they came here. I can't tell my child that he was beaten as a newborn. Like, how do you do that? And so I think that what's really important, with the help of we did this a lot with the help of therapists and psychologists, but we were able to recreate those narratives with our kids so that they know that something bad happened. And it is not that they had bad parents, because that's a huge component of this, is that your child is partially their parents. And so if you tear down the parent, you're tearing down the child. And so a lot of hard language is around, you know, drugs cause people to do things they would never choose to do unless they were altered or changed in their mind. And we focus a lot on that and about how their parents really loved them, but that a judge has determined that they weren't safe in that home. But I do think that they have to understand the narrative, or they can't actually process that gut-wrenching heartbreak that's sitting inside of them.
Thank you for sharing that. And we do have a couple questions that I am going to ask on behalf of our guests. The first one is, do you have strategies to utilize with red brain children in regular public schools?
Well, here's absolutely. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm pretty super involved in training teachers, but also going in before the school year starts and trying to meet with whatever teacher my child has. My children all have different maladaptive strategies when they first come into my home in foster care, where I'm like, we need to address these. So let me give you an example. Israel in the picture has indiscriminate affection. He would love to, he will work a room. He literally, if he rolled into a room with all of these adults in it, he would literally work the whole room. But that's maladaptive for him. That isn't a child this is superficial charm because he's looking for his next caregiver, okay? And so I met with the school. I gave them the information of the things that my child was dealing in and where their brain was at. And I think that that's important because teachers, they want to know this information, but it can't just be this blanket of things. They've got 30 kids in their classroom, but if I can come in and say, this is my son Israel, a little bit of his history, because they have to know history. Teachers have to know why they're seeing the shark fin, okay? And then I'm gonna say, these are the strategies we do at home. And then I'm gonna tell you, I wrote into his IEP. He has an IEP, and I wrote into his IEP that he may not hug and kiss staff, that he may not sit in staff's lap, that those are things that because he's a cute kid in a wheelchair and he will let you do that, like I had to literally make it like a binding document that they're not going to do that. And honestly look almost like a mean parent in a little bit of a way, but I feel like when you can pre-educate teachers, they want to do a good job by your kid. They do, but they have to be able to understand. Remember I talked about earlier, privileging the parent. Part of that is understanding that children in care might even triangulate a teacher and an adult, right? There are things that your kids in your home do as strategies to survive. Identify those and give that tool to the teacher and equip them to be able to handle those maladaptive behaviors.
So that's really great. And so Andrea wants to know, like, what happens when children refuse to participate with these tools? They've used breathing techniques and yoga and the kids will refuse. So what do you do then? What other tools are available?
So, okay, in the moment, the sliding door moments we say, if my child does not want to engage in anything, then I'm leaving them to, like, I'm not going to just keep pursuing. Basically, if my child's walking away from me, that means that I need to leave it. Because if they're in a survival brain and I keep cornering them and approaching them, then I'm basically escalating them. Okay, because their brain in a survival brain is not making conscious choices to tick me off. Because I think that's part of it is we're like, oh, this is about me. But man, we hold ourselves in such high regard when we think the behavior is about us, when really the behavior isn't. And it took me a long time to realize that. Like, he didn't do this to me. He did this because he's looking for some relief. He's looking for meeting some unmet need. And so what I do in that moment, if they move from me, then I do what's called the ABC and XYZ of parenting. Okay, so think about the kid's behavior. That's the XYZ. So say my child came home from school, chucked his backpack at the wall, cursed at me, and broke my lamp. Okay, first of all, I'm going to look at the XYZ and I'm first going to calm myself, because the reality is this: that stuff doesn't matter. The lamp's already broken. He's already done all the things. So I have to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take my own deep breaths, because the reality in that moment is I want to put down my foot and say, you don't walk in my home like that. Go back out and try that again. You don't behave that way. That's what I want to say. But we can't. That's not the space our kid is in. All right. So I look at XYZ and maybe my child walks off because they're honestly cooling down. I then have to say I'm ignoring XYZ and I'm moving to the ABC. And the ABC is this. Okay, is this trauma-versary? Is this the time of year that something bad happened in his home, or that he was removed from care or into care? I mean, I'm thinking about that. B, I'm thinking about what happened at school today. Did he have a test today? What was maybe different at school today? Okay, like, and I'm ticking through all the things that could be causing XYZ, all right? And that it's basically becoming what we call a behavior detective. And so then I'm waiting until his brain is calm to go back in and try and hold the space again. And I will tell you that with my teenage boys, it's sometimes a day later. But it isn't going in and punishing in the moment, because our job is discipline. And that's teaching. I'm trying to teach my child to have adaptive coping skills. And so I want to teach and be able to help them see, wow, when you were angry and your body yesterday was exploding and you did these things, like I saw an angry kid and I'm guessing that something might have happened. Do you want to talk about that? And then I sit and I wait. Okay. The other component of that is that we teach a lot in preloading relationship. All right. Our kids are Teflon for bad Teflon for good and Velcro for bad, right? So anything bad or any correction or anything we ask them to do transactionally in a relationship, they are just going to just be like, yep, that's because I'm a bad kid. Yep, I deserve that. Oh, you hate me. All those things, right? And so we've learned that we want to preload relationship. And so when we start seeing an uptick in behaviors in our kids, what we end up doing is we will carve out a time every day that's there 15 minutes. And so I might tell my son, Joel, hey, every day at 8 o'clock is Joel time. And I look forward to it every day. And I'm so excited just because I feel like I haven't gotten to be around you a lot lately. And so I'm just going to come and I'm going to sit with you for 15 minutes. And I'm going to put my phone away and I just want to hear about your day. Now, my son is a teenage boy. Do you really think my teenage boy's like, oh, yay, I'm so excited for Joel time? No. In fact, the first few times I go in, he doesn't even want to listen or talk to me. He's going to kind of ignore me. But what you'll see happen is no kid is going to just continue to ignore you. He eventually starts talking. And it isn't about anything. It's just about, yeah, I saw this cool truck I'd like to buy someday. Awesome, tell me about it. And it's giving them that undivided time that is all about, I just want to sit and be with you and see you and hear you, because our kids don't get that enough. We live in an incredibly busy world. How often do we sit down and we carve out time without our phones and without all the extra things going on and say, this is your time? It's huge. So the preloading of relationship is a big deal for our kids.
So when you say that, we know that foster parents, regular parents, teachers, etc., struggle with that time that you're talking about. And we know that when a child walks away from an adult, we believe that the child is misbehaving. We label them whatever, bad child, disrespectful, etc. How do you turn that around for individuals who haven't practiced this way? You're really talking about doing something a totally different way than what many of us have been raised to do or thought to do when we work with bad children.
So we teach a lot in role play, because it really is, we laugh, we call it backwards parenting. And I'm going to tell you, and even for teaching, it's backwards teaching, okay? How's it working now? How is it working now with what you're doing? Because what we recognized in our home is it wasn't working. It wasn't working. And a lot of what my husband and I teach is understanding what the brain is doing in those moments and why what you're doing that's traditional parenting or traditional teaching isn't working. And so when you can understand the science of what the brain is doing, that helps alleviate, and you say, okay, that makes sense. Because I could tell you what you're seeing in your home. I could tell you, these are the behaviors you're seeing. And then I could tell you what the brain is doing and why. And so when you can break it down to the science of that, then you can say, okay, it makes sense that I need to do this differently, because my kids that I birthed and grew up with a mom who was downloading resiliency through attachment and all those things, traditional parenting works, right? But my kid that, like, you can do it all you want. You can play whack-a-mole with behaviors. And honestly, as a teacher, when I first started, I was really good. I was so good at consequences and rewards and sticker charts. Like, I was like the best. And I'd see a behavior and I would go and I would consequence it and it would be gone. But guess what? The next week, 4 worse behaviors came popping up out of that same kid. And so it was whack-a-mole, 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 behavior patrol. Well, if you want to continue behavior patrol or continue whack-a-mole, then that's what the space you'll go. But if you change your parenting and understand what the brain is doing, then you recognize, if I actually address the goldfish, the shark fin goes away. And that's where you save time, because you think like, oh, this is time, this is time. You're right, it is time. But when I preload time, or when I give time now and I do this right now, I'm not doing this for the rest of his life. I'm giving him the tools now, because it is incredibly difficult that by the time kids are using substances, and by the time they have a criminal record, and by the time they're sitting in a jail cell, that we're trying to rewire and help fix a brain, because the brain's developing to the age and growing to the age of 25, right? And then after that, yes, we can change neural pathways, but it is a lot harder. And there's 2 time periods in time when children are most susceptible, or the brains are most plastic. That is in utero to about 18 months or 2 years. But then we hit that gap of time again in early adolescence, where the brain is once again plastic and very open to external influence. And so we miss that second chance a lot, because our kids at that age are influenced by their peers. And so that's when we train and talk about, how do we push in green brains into our kids through peers? What does that look like?
That's great. Thank you, Stacy. So I have one or two more comments I just want to share. So Rosa states that the use of social emotional learning, a holistic approach, and engaging ACE numbers and findings may prove to be very beneficial. And she's saying that the Indiana Department of Education has posted information and a curriculum for these activities and lessons for those individuals that might be interested in looking for that. And we have a question that says, we're trapped in a whack-a-mole with my 13-year-old. How do I refocus? We are bonded, but getting nowhere easily.
Wow. Okay. So when we hit 13, we hit a whole world of puberty, right? And the hormones are just crazy in a brain that is really struggling to deal with all of that going on. And we always say it's like a brain in a blender. And so part of 13 is riding out, because there already are the big emotional swings. But it's also, that is a really good point in time to start teaching your child to recognize what stress is. My husband teaches at the high school level, and you would be shocked to know how many kids don't know what stress looks like in their own body. And we teach on this too. So but they don't even recognize what stress looks like, but they also don't have the tools. And so interestingly enough, my husband was teaching an advanced A&P class at the high school level. And he asked them, like, okay, what does stress look like? And there wasn't a whole lot of conversation, but they had a lesson on it. And this class is very verbose. They talk all the time. So then he asked them, okay, what do you guys do to handle stress? Because the whole class basically was like, we are stressed out beyond control. Right? And it was pretty silent until one kid raised their hand and said, yoga? And so my husband's like, awesome, do you do yoga? And he goes, well, no, I read somewhere that yoga might help. Okay, so we actually can give our teenagers the tools to identify the stress and how to relieve it, and for a 13-year-old boy, a lot of that is, number one, going to be limiting technology. Technology in the brain of a child with trauma, it lights up the addiction center of the brain. So understand how bad technology is for our kids that have ACEs or high ACEs. Okay, and then really pushing outside play and exercise. That is huge for a child, especially a boy who has testosterone and all those things just raging through their body. And I would be using play in order to give them relationship. And this is interesting. We tend to stop hugging and touching our kids when they become teenagers. And remember I called them porcupines? Like my teenagers are porcupines, right? So I've had to get inventive on how I make sure that they are getting hugs from me every day, because no teenage boy is like, Mom, I want a hug. No, and in fact, if I hug them, they're like, ugh, right? And so I go out and we'll play, and we'll wrestle around, or we'll throw a football, or we'll do things, but I also will tell them, man, I haven't got my hug from you today. And it's funny and playful and jokey, but you have no idea how many parents where I've asked, how many times have you hugged your kid in the last week? Will say, I haven't hugged my kid in a month. Okay. So my husband likes to say, even porcupines need hugs. Porcupines need hugs. Physical touch that's safe is huge for our kids. Huge for our kids.
So Stacy, thank you for that. And I think you've kind of answered this next person's statement, but I'm going to read it anyway. Dorothea says that I'm an adoptive foster mom and school social worker. I find that trying to undo damage in a child that is currently living in a less than ideal home life is so difficult to combat. I'm looking for outside the box ideas to try and reach those students in spite of the information they are receiving at home.
Okay, I'm going to blow your mind, okay? So go and Google islands of competence, because what we do in our school system is that we try and fix deficits all the time. Sit in any IEP meeting, and all we do is, let's fix a deficit, fix a deficit. And islands of competence was actually coined by, I can't remember the doctor's name, but it was for kids with ADHD. But we've seen it dramatically change our kids in the school system when I start IEP meetings on my kids, and I talk about what they're competent in instead of what deficits need to be fixed. And so when we can start with, this is what you're competent in, and yep, they're going to go home and there's lots of deficits, not just in them, but in the home, we see huge, huge change. Because remember, these kids are just sucking on to the bad things and holding on to it. And so if instead of even talking about the bad things, we build competency in them in the things they're good at, then what we see is that the deficits start repairing themselves a little bit. And so if you look up islands of competence, I think that might give you a little bit of direction how as a social worker, you can make a really huge impact in your kids that go home to less than optimal homes. And thank you for your work.
For those comments, Stacy. I think it's important to know that many times children run to school for that safety net, or because they know that school is presenting something totally different to them than what home life is. And so that's a great way to look at. So I put islands of competence out there for individuals in case you would like to see that. So I just want to personally thank you on behalf of our planning committee, Stacy. You have been awesome today.
Thank you.
You have shedded a totally different light on ACEs and how to use them, and how we as practitioners and social workers and foster care moms, et cetera, need to really shape our thinking and reshape our thinking when we're working with this category. Thank you for all the work you've done with your children and for sharing your story today. You have been outstanding. Last comment is, you rock, and this information was great.